Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Player 2 podcast. I'm your co-host, Rade
And I'm your co-host, Dave Leary. It is wonderful once again to be back with you, Roddy, on this fine afternoon to have a little chat, a little podcast chat.
Yeah, and this is an interesting week because we've got some funny developments, some good news. Not a lot of terrible stuff happened this week in gaming. There's plenty of terrible stuff in the world, but in the games business, hasn't been too bad.
No major layoffs to discuss, so we could take a week off from that. Yeah, let's get into the entertaining stuff.
Yeah, so going to a quickie. So Electronic Arts just announced they closed their fiscal year with record performance. Battlefield 6, we knew that was a great performing game from last year, but Apex Legends coming through, still putting up strong numbers for them, and then their sports games across the board were pretty good. So I think that's a good sign for the company.
For sure. Makes sense. All the mainstays for EA just still chugging along as they do. Not necessarily a lot of new IPs in the offering there, but EA has its business and it works for them.
Yeah, it does. All right, some other stuff, news in the finance side. We'll save the last bit of good news for last, but man, what is going on with GameStop?
The purchase of eBay. Yeah, I did want to talk about this. I love everything about this story. Let's get into it. Do you want to give the summary?
Yeah, so GameStop got a new CEO not too long ago, and younger gentleman has done a lot to kind of stabilize it and turn it around. But now he's talking about purchasing eBay.
He has, and people are asking kind of with what money, I think somewhat justifiably. GameStop is worth around 12 billion, give or take. eBay is worth around 45 billion. He has just recently, as of close to the time we're recording this podcast, gone on a financial show and given an interview that was a bit of a train wreck in a few ways, where he was pressed on that point, and it's all a little vague. They are getting some money from external investors. It is apparently for half stock and half cash, but it is a little unclear exactly what the play is here. They're talking about going after Amazon, and there is some interesting synergy in GameStop having a ton of physical store locations, which eBay does not have right now. But I'm not sure I see the play here, much less how they're actually going to pay for this.
I don't know. Like, it's interesting. It's fueling, there's some stunts that have been going on that are fueling rumors that this is not a real thing. Hilariously, so Ryan Cohen, the CEO, sold socks, not stocks, socks that you put on your feet on eBay to help fund the acquisition. And he got his eBay account banned and he's talking about it. But he honestly, like in today's world, like this guy's getting attention. Whether this is real or not, we'll have to see. But I think to your point, GameStop had a really lucrative business in the used game trade back in the day. That's sort of gone away as digital has become a thing. But they do have physical locations. People go in there. It's a place to hang out. Do they become the mass market mall pawn shop of 2026? I mean, I don't know. Maybe.
Boy, it's still a strange play to me. And I think one of the interesting tidbits I read in the last 24 hours, and this is moving very quickly, so by the time the podcast comes out, we may be behind the curve here, but the investor, Michael Burry, who, if you've seen The Big Short, he is the character played by Christian Bale. He was actually fairly excited about GameStop for a long time. He had a large position in it, and he was giving them some advice about possibly moving into the acquisition space as they seem to be trying to do now. But as of a couple of days ago, he sold his entire position and says he no longer has faith in the company. So, a few big investors in the company are already kind of questioning this play. And I don't really see how this works. It would be certainly interesting if it happened. I kind of like the idea of the eBay store down the street that I could go in and unload all my crap in my house, maybe, if that's what they're thinking. But I'm just not seeing this right now. And I suspect that we'll have more fun stories about this to cover in the weeks ahead.
So when GameSpot was on Reddit with Wall Street bets and everything, I became a GameStop shareholder. I own one share of GameStop because, hey, I'm holding on for dear life. I'm here for the ride to the moon.
I actually was going to ask you that question. I mean, how much of GameStop's ability to even entertain this idea is in part due to the short squeeze from a couple of years ago? I mean, yeah, they're way off the peak, but their value is in part still tied a little bit to all that craziness that went on a couple of years ago with that stock and a more recent 2024 spike that they had. I wonder if they would even be able to entertain this purchase had that stock not spiked from that short squeeze that happened.
Yeah, probably not. So you mentioned developing news. as of the just now, they're recording it. eBay has permanently banned Ryan Cohen's account, so he can't sell under that name on the store anymore.
Excellent. This all gets into a little inside baseball stuff if you enjoy financial talk, but it is game adjacent and it'll be an entertaining story. Absolutely. I guess I don't know who I'm rooting for in this, if anyone, but hopefully it works out for somebody.
Continuing a little bit of funny news that's game related. So I think we may have touched on this before, but the UK and some other countries are starting to have pretty strict age verification laws. And there's a ton of pushback around all of that. We're starting to see like what happened like when Discord was talking about doing it and some other platforms. Well, some enterprising young lads and lasses in the UK have managed to circumvent UK privacy checks by drawing fake mustaches on their profiles. About a third of them are getting past the age verification with this.
I don't know why anyone should be surprised by this story. Kids are the same as they always have been. They're resourceful, they're clever, they're able to circumvent the clumsy fumblings of adults trying to keep them away from content. I'm going to seriously date myself here, but, I remember slipping downstairs late at night to watch R-rated movies on cable and I'll really date myself here, when my grades in school would occasionally slip and my parents were trying to figure out how to punish me. They would often take my Dungeons and Dragons manuals away for a while as a punishment, which tells you what kind of kid I was. But I had a way of quickly figuring out what the best hiding places were around the house and sneaking them back when my parents weren't looking. So, kids will be kids. There is no age verification that's going to be foolproof here. I think the real difference these days is that now legislatures in various countries are involved. So, companies have no choice but to continue to try to figure out what the legal standards of enforcing age verification are and just do the best job they can.
So you're coming at this with the serious questions. I'm sitting here wondering, like, can I do a Salvador Dali mustache or does it have to be like full on Yosemite Sam? Like, I have no idea. Like, what are we talking about here?
I'm not sure why they're going through the trouble of drawing on mustaches. It feels like you could just get one of those fake ones from a costume shop.
Maybe that's what they're doing too. But man, that like I think I've got somewhere in a box from one of these moves some Groucho Marx eyebrows and nose and mustache. So like I'll bust that out.
That feels like that would be
see
perfect.
What happens. Yeah. All right. Some more news. This time, good news, but I think it's good news. Probably not for some people. What's going on with Roblox?
So this is interesting. We are maybe seeing the peak, despite this kind of press around the thought that Roblox is now, perhaps even more users than Steam, perhaps the future, whereas as PC gaming might be declining other than systems like this. They've seen some decline in revenue and users in the last couple of quarters. There's various theories around why this might be. Some of it might, in fact, be increased age verification steps that they're requiring users to take. And their strategy has started to shift a little bit. They seem to be actively pursuing an older audience, going so far as to give developers who are developing for older audiences a little bit of a higher revenue share, which may just simply be a side effect of their user base starting to age up a little bit. But it is interesting to wonder if, hey, have they reached their peak? Is this it for Roblox? Is this as high as they can go?
So in a lot of things financial related, like you don't know you're in a bubble when you're in it, though people will claim they are, but you really can't. You don't know if you're in a recession until you're past a certain distance into it. I think we're going to see if these past couple quarters are a blip or a trend. And if they are a trend, then it's probably going to be a continuing downward trajectory for it. And then they'll be managing a glide slope. Is it fast? Is it slow? Maybe they could turn it around, but usually not with something like this. I just want to be really clear to listeners and viewers. I don't like to see games fail. But I have no love for Roblox at all. And it has nothing to do with the type of game that it is or the people that are enjoying their product. I simply don't like a game that's clearly aimed towards kids, that's being bought by kids, when basic privacy protections are not taken by the platform. And I don't know what their excuse is or why they didn't do that. It's not that hard. But when you keep reading story after story about kids getting groomed or abused on a platform like that, and the developer / publisher is not taking steps we know work to curb that, I have no respect for the platform. I won't let my kids use it. And for that reason alone, if they go away, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have both been a little bit harsh on Roblox on the podcast in the past. I think maybe you a little more so than me. I would not want to, I think, see them completely go away. I think that there is a pretty large ecosystem there now that is keeping an awful lot of developers fed. So for that reason alone, I wouldn't mind if they hung around. I agree with everything you said about their business model and their age verification practices, though, to be fair, I do think they are starting to take some steps in the right direction now with some of the recent changes they've announced.
Yeah, I mean, I would rather have them fix their adult predator problem than go out of business. I would much rather have that solution. I think it's better for everybody involved, not just the employees and the fans of the game, but for the industry.
Yeah,
But
100%.
if they're not going to do that, then I just don't want that product around myself or my family.
Totally
All right,
fair.
some better news. Let's talk about Hooded Horse and what they're doing. They just closed a venture round with Griffin Gaming Partners.
Yeah, kind of a big deal. It's a giant indie dev game fund to the tune of about $100 million, right?
Yeah, and one of the interesting things, this is not equity based venture financing. Like this is like they're doing rev share, which is that's not common for a fund like this. So that's new.
And I know I have been a fan of Hooded Horse in general for a couple of years now. They are kind of on fire when I look around at all the kind of interesting indie games that they're putting out on Steam lately and backing. They really seem to be making just some fantastic plays with some games that I really enjoy. I am optimistic that they are involved with this fund, and I really hope that this is a way to unlock some great new funding for some hopefully fantastic smaller titles going forward.
Yeah, I'm a fan of them as well. And just to be clear, I don't think the revenue based investment versus equity was purely egalitarian. I'm not trying to guess their motives here. I think if you're doing equity based financing, specifically in games, you get your money back when there's an exit. And there are no exits or almost no exits happening. So if you're looking to invest funds in gaming and you don't know how long that money is going to get tied up because nobody's buying gaming companies right now, then you can't get your money back and hopefully your return to reinvest in the next thing. Revenue based makes a lot of sense. And it's nice to see somebody who's developer focused do that because I think they're going to make better decisions on what products they're doing. And it should be better for developers too.
That's well said. I like revenue share as well. I think, what this suggests to me is they're looking to make a lot of small bets really quickly and they won't all pay off. They don't need them all to pay off, but if a couple do pay off, they'll do very well out of this process.
Yeah, for sure. And so this kind of leads us naturally into the topic to talk about this week. And that's how do we measure whether something's successful? Like if you're doing that kind of an equity based or sorry, not equity based, revenue based investment, then obviously one of the key metrics you care about is, how much money are you making for the product? Because that's how you get your return on that. But there's other ways to do that. And, there's sayings that have been going around, for a long time, right? So if you don't have a clear goal, your plan doesn't have a purpose and it's just a wish, right? That's an old aphorism. But more importantly, if you can't measure something, you can't improve it. Because we're talking about shifting anything about a product into the direction that you want it to go, whether it's how the players do it or engage with the game, how much fun they're having. And our default has always been well, you can't measure fun. I'll know it when you see it. But that's not necessarily true. And I thought it'd be a good topic to talk about this week.
Yeah, a fantastic topic. I think everyone from publishers to developers to players all have different criteria for how they measure success. And I think, frankly, we talked last week about kind of wanting to help developers be better. I think a lot of developers don't even think about what success means for them when they get started. They have a game idea, they're passionate about it, they're going in, but what does success look for them coming out the other side of it? And I think there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot in how the definition of success and the criteria that you measure a product by has changed over the years. Yeah, great topic.
So let's put the business metrics aside for a bit. Profitability, wish lists for early engagement, all that stuff, because I think those are pretty evident to most people who are listening to the podcast. But if you're working on a feature for a game and you're in mid development, what metrics are you using to decide if this is the right thing for the product and if the players are going to like it?
Boy, that's tricky, right? Because there are horror stories about the misuse of metrics, extremely nitpicky stuff like starting to do A/B testing on whether a particular button should be red or green. There's a time and a place for that stuff, particularly on mobile. But you know,
It's orange, by the way, if it
is
has to do with making money.
is it orange? Excellent.
It is orange.
I think the answer early on has to be that a team needs to define what that means for them. If they are making a kind of a hardcore niche game that's targeting a very specific audience, they need to bring in the right people to have a look at that. And early on, the team is going to be the best judge of it. But as time goes on and they start to widen out and think about what is our audience going to be when we finally launch this game, I think they've got to kind of start to think about what their audience is. So success is tied to the audience. I think there's no escaping that. I'm not talking about financial success that, as you said, will come if the game works, but more how players are going to respond. At the end of the day, I think that's what developers care about. All of us want our games to be well received. We get excited after a launch when we read forums and see people talking about the game. And players and developers feed on each other, right? There's a great cyclical loop that happens when a game is successful and launches to a good reception.
So I've got some specific examples of things that I've seen, and it's hard to put a number on it, but these are metrics that you can look at for a product. So if your team doesn't want to play your own game, that is a sure sign you've got a stinker on your hands. And I've worked on products where you've had to mandate dog fooding or playing your own product, to borrow the Silicon Valley term on that one. That's never good, right? Like if people are just naturally picking it up and playing it, I think that's a pretty good sign. And I'll give you a specific example of one that worked out. We were shipping an expansion pack at Westwood for Red Alert, and one of our art directors was leaving the company, and we were having a goodbye get together for him. And he wouldn't leave because he was in the middle of a multiplayer match with a couple other people, a LAN match internally with some other folks. So we had a group that just wouldn't go. It's like, dude, come on. Like, we're going to be late. Everyone's waiting for you. He's like, no, I have to finish this match. I'm going to beat him. And he just would not put it down. I mean, obviously that was a really successful game, but like we saw metrics like that internally all the time. Like people would just stop working on it, would want to play.
So that's a fantastic one. I do think it's a little bit genre specific. A multiplayer game like you described is obviously easier to get the team excited about and keep them engaged for a long time. Something more linear or that's a shorter experience, like I think about the work that you and I did on Blade Runner. And while we enjoyed moments of testing that and playing it, it's not a game that after a year and a half of working on it, we were going to continue to enjoy playing it just because of the type of experience it was. I certainly do remember similar stories to yours from Ensemble days when we're testing Age of Mythology and Age 3. There would be multiplayer matches that had members of the team just shouting with joy and a lot of it was that competitive streak that some of our players had at that studio. But when a team is engaged, it is one of the best metrics you can have.
I think this gets a little bit early or easier if your product is in an early access mode where you can just look at how, like, not necessarily just playing the game, but you can look at how people are engaging with your posts and your commentary about what's coming on and like your overall sentiment about what that looks like. And it's not just like a really good community person could separate just the couple loud voices making all the noise from what everyone else is feeling and give you really good data about like, hey, how did that go over?
Early access is a huge tool these days. We know. We've talked about that a ton. I think one of the interesting things about early access is, and this has positives and negatives, it does change perception now. When you go the early access route, it's basically the launch of your game. So I think about something like Valheim as an example, which has been a hugely successful title, but it still has kind of lingered in early access for a really long time. Sometimes games, when they take that route and the updates don't come as quickly as they need to, people get to the end of that and a 1.0 finally launches and the fans are like, that's it? That's the 1.0 version? What were we waiting for? And then review scores plummet. There's a way to do that stuff and do it right, but I think you have to be a little careful with that route.
So if you're looking at your game, besides just the business stuff, like I'm looking at engagement of the product and how many people are coming into it. Are they coming back to the product? How long between return sessions are there? Like, it's not every game is a game that's designed to be played 3-4 times a day, right? If you look at a casual mobile game, you might be doing that as a little time wasting thing here or there. But You might not be doing that for a console game or a PC game, but sort of like, what does that pattern look like? Is it healthy? How long are the sessions that people are coming into the product? Gives you a good idea of like, are they really getting into the depth of the product? But I think it's important to just really instrument your game and look at the right things, because yeah, you might have good day 7 or day 14 retention of your product because you're pumping out content, and then you get on that treadmill. But like, it doesn't tell you if you've got a deep game that's really resonating with people or not.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I like that you and I are having this discussion and it's kind of centered around a player and audience perception of success, not publisher or even developer as much. I think we could probably agree that a game that is not enjoyed by its target audience is not one that is successful.
Yes, now that's 100% true. I think there was a point in time where through really efficient and effective marketing, you could sell a stinker and you would make your money back. I'm thinking back to the era where we saw so many just cheap IP based games, like movie license games, and why they generally got a bad rep for a long time. But that's done. Like, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, those days are over. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about that's kind of related to that is I do see one bad trend with the way we think about success these days. I think the allotted timelines for a game to be successful have felt both simultaneously too short and too long to me. And I'll explain what I mean. If a game launches and it doesn't immediately have great Steam user reviews and a great Metacritic score, it can quickly be painted a failure and just drop off the radar entirely. And at the same time, if a game doesn't have years of robust post launch support and additional patches and retain a ridiculously high audience in a world where there's a million games to choose from, it can also be seen as a failure. And I think both those trends are kind of poisonous to our industry, right? I do agree with what you say that it's kind of a good trend that you can no longer launch a stinker and overcome the fact that it's a stinker by good marketing. But I also think we need to give some games a time to find an audience and time to get out there and grow. And I fear that sometimes we're not doing that as well as we could collectively as an industry and also just the audience for games.
So no disagreement there, but I put the blame on that on the stores, because the way those algorithms work is they punish you if you come out and you don't get traction, particularly the mobile platforms, but this is true on all of them. If you have a slow burn launch, it is really, really hard to overcome that later. And it's not just all like, that's the storefront problem, which is like 90% of it. But if you go and you put out a game that maybe it's got some graphical issues and it doesn't look great initially, but you're polishing that stuff up, well, that stuff gets cemented in your Google search results. And it's the first thing people can go and look at. And if you made a meaningful change to improve the game, they're not going to see it. And that sucks. And so like, you get these weird snapshots in time and ranking algorithms that just punish the kind of behavior that you're describing.
Yeah, and maybe that's okay when it's a game that is kind of a stinker anyway. Like I think about a Concord, which maybe wasn't given quite the shot it should have been because it wasn't quite as terrible as the press made it out to be, but it was still not a great game. Having that go away quickly, as sad as I am for the developers that worked on it, is not necessarily a bad thing. That's business and game evolution in action, right?
Yeah. And then to your other point about like, it needs to have like this really, really long tail. I mean, I think that's just a function of it being harder than ever to acquire users or customers for your product. And the natural desire when you do that is, once you have a customer, hold on to them for as long as you can. And so that's one of the reasons why everything kind of pushed into this live service update, keep the customer going.
That part really makes me sad, though, because I think there should be room for the fantastic 5 or 6 hour one and done experience that comes out, everyone loves it, and it makes back 10 times what it cost. And that should be seen as a success. And I'm not sure why it no longer is. I think it should be, absolutely.
So I can give you, now I'm going to put on my business person hat for a minute. I can give you one reason.
Here comes the suit. Do you have a suit that you can wear for this?
I'll put on my AI suit at some point. Maybe I'll edit that with this. No, I think the problem is because it's so hard to get that attention. If you're looking, if say you did that title and it did great, and you made 10x your initial investment. Your odds of repeating that with a second title that's not a sequel are poor. And investors and publishers, they all know that. They're not stupid. So, unless you could put your own money into it, like you're probably not going to get funding for it. And even if you do put your own money in it, like there's no guarantee that you're going to have success on it. But there's some breakout examples of this, but that's generally the rule.
But I mean, if you are, and maybe this goes to how we fund games, and maybe this is where things like what they're doing with Hooded Horse is going to change this equation a little bit. If a game comes out and made 10x revenue, in theory, you've got a lot of stuff that comes out of that that's valuable. You've got hopefully a new IP that you can make a sequel from. You've got a developer who's got experience that now has a name built for themselves. And when you talk about how do you fund the next game that these guys try, well, shoot, you just made 10 times your money. Well, what's the share for the developers here? At some point, I feel like that should be a profitable business if that's really what's happening.
It should be. Let's assume that all of that money that they made goes back to that developer, and they didn't decide to go and throw wild parties and recruit a posse to burn through their money and have to start with nothing again. Then yeah, they should be able to fund their next title. Problem is, a lot of times that money is spoken for because like people did put money into it. These people worked for next to nothing for a while. And so it's like, great, maybe you as a developer made $500,000 profit from this game, but you drew like no salary for the 5 years that you worked on it before then. Suddenly it doesn't look like quite the windfall anymore.
I mean, sure, that's true, but there are a lot of assumptions baked into your supposition.
Sure.
Right?
And it's not always the case. Like everyone's going to be a little bit different. But like I think the challenge there is like it's still hard to get people to notice a game for the reasons we talked about before. And so like that pushes a lot of folks to be more risk averse and say, well, let's just keep going with this one. Let's sequel it. Let's put in DLC. Let's turn it into a live service. And that's fine. I get it. And we've seen great titles that do that. And I don't mind that at all. But I really do, I think you do as well, lament that we don't just see these one-hit wonders come out and just really be bright and entertain us and delight us. And it just doesn't need a follow-up.
Yeah. That's what I would like. I would like there to be room for the big live service games as well as the small one-offs.
Yeah, and maybe we get there at some point, but like until we see some changes in the way store ranking works and how titles get noticed, I don't know if there's much power for a developer to change that.
I do like that you have placed all of the blame on the terrible algorithm that everyone hates on storefronts. That is a fine place to blame it. It is a convenient villain.
It's not just one, right? They're all like this because you tune it for a certain type of behavior. And if it isn't tough to move, I mean, we saw this problem when I was working in VR we called it ranking calcification, where like your top titles are your top titles because they're your top titles. And you get into this circular logic thing. And I mean, heck, I managed a team that had the number one VR title for years. And I'm like, maybe someday someone's going to dethrone us. Someone finally did, and I'm glad it was a really good friend of mine and his coworkers. We should have him on soon. I'll ask him. But it's not healthy.
No, not at all.
So let's talk about a specific game this week. It is part of this example. This isn't our game of the week, but I think it's an interesting example of one of these titles with metrics that matter. And we talk about long tail and all that stuff. Let's go back to our favorite arc raiders.
Let's make it the game of the week. It's been a while since we revisited our famous game, and I think it's fine to have that be our game of the week as well as part of this discussion we've been having. Yeah, so I mean, some of the noise around arc raiders in the last month or so has been less positive than when they launched. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. And part of it I think is fair. Part of it is I think a little unfair, but we'll get into the details.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those details. So I'm going to go on the record out of the gate as saying I still think this game is an enormous success, regardless of what the buzz has changed in the last month or so. I looked, and their 24-hour peak last weekend was still 100,000 users. They did just launch a fairly substantial update, so that was probably part of it. But bottom line is I'd much rather be in their position than in Marathon's position. I also think about the fact that they launched at the end of October. So we are what now, 6, 7 months into the launch of this title. And, they have retained an audience that's really pretty substantial for all that time. So this is kind of exactly what we were just talking about. I view this as a success. I'll put the one caveat on this point, and that is that Embark itself has said that they view this as a 10-year game. They want this to be a game that lasts a really long time, that has a long and robust live environment, that really retains an audience in the same way that something like a Rust does, or a Daisy, or one of those mainstay titles that has stuck around for the long haul. And there are some of the choices they've made recently and that maybe suggest that they're not quite on their mission as well as they should be. What do you think has caused this sort of change in perception recently?
So I know a lot of people were complaining about a new map addition, and particularly a lot of complaints around weapon durability. And it's interesting because they had a really good system of sinks and drains, to use an old MMO term about how their economy worked. And they changed it, and people got a sense now of, I could fire this weapon this many times before it breaks, and the cost to repair and consumables. And I get why they did it, and it makes sense why they have that mechanic in it. But after a while, it's just not really fun. Like I don't enjoy repairing my weapon. Just something about the whole way that it does just feels like work, and not in a good way. And I'm wondering if there isn't a different way to present it, but kind of achieve the same goal that would just be more entertaining for players.
Weapon durability is seldom, in my experience, a fun mechanic. Sometimes that friction is necessary. When I look at their last few months, I think I would say that their struggles with the cheaters has been an issue that has driven away some of their top streamers a little bit. Every multiplayer game struggles with that problem. They have had a few technical problems, though. In general, their servers have been fantastic. I think one of the design things that they're struggling with a little bit is their expedition concept. In theory, I like the idea of incentives to make people do a voluntary character reset rather than wiping a server. But I think they've kind of had to experiment a little bit with exactly what people want there. And it's a tricky problem, right? It's a problem that not a lot of games have really tried to solve, where you make somebody want to do a character reset every couple months without making it feel like you're punishing people. So that's a tricky problem to tackle. So I think they've struggled a little with that.
Diving into that specific one. So I went through the reset because I wanted to experience what it was like. And I had waited. I missed the first one. I was traveling a little bit and I didn't get a chance to collect all the items to do the reset. So I caught the second one that they did. And by that time, my play style had settled into a very familiar rhythm. I like the anvil. That is my favorite weapon in the game. Resetting it, not having an anvil, and not having a more deterministic, doesn't have to be 100%, but a more deterministic way to get blueprints so I could get my beloved anvil back again, really soured me for a while. And I stopped playing for a bit because of that. And I don't know if that's unique to me or if a lot of other people did that, but that was one problem I saw with the whole reset expedition mechanic.
That's an interesting insight. That's not something I think I personally share. I actually kind of enjoy resetting and doing a grind again and trying to seek out the stuff. It gives me fresh life on the game when it happens. But I do wonder how many other people feel that way. Certainly, if everyone is reset, like some games do, and you're all on the same footing, then that feels a little more fair in some ways.
Well, I tell you though, I loved the spec reset for my character and going down different paths there. That I found thoroughly enjoyable. And that reminds me of playing different classes and specs in Diablo and other RPGs. It's specifically my favorite weapon, my favorite toy. Not having a path to get that fast enough, man, that irked me in a deep way.
Well, I will say overall, I think they have kept the patches and new content coming. I think their pace of that stuff has been pretty good. It's not the crazy Crimson Desert cadence where they've overhauled that entire game in the span of a month or so, but they've been pretty frequent and regular. And I have personally been taking a break from it. But to be fair, I spent a lot of time on this game. In terms of hours, it's in my top 5 most played games on Steam. So I guess my thought as we come out of this is I wonder a little bit if they're just a victim of their own success at this point. I put in so many hours into the game early on that I feel like I was bound to burn out on it and want to try some other stuff eventually. And I wonder if to some extent that's what's happening here. People just have fatigue from playing what is really fundamentally a great game with fantastic mechanics for a lot of time.
Yeah, and it's the type of game where you can't, even when you're in it, you're just always on. Like you can't really play that super casually other than to just play fewer sessions. So that might be part of it. I will say what gives me hope that this has a shot at being that 10-year game that Embark wants is they are listening to their community. Like they're rolling out some anti-cheat stuff that looks pretty good and doesn't seem to be the really onerous anti-cheat that's out there. Some point, I think we should have an engineer on here, and I'd really like to talk through this idea I've had to use AI for anti-cheat because
Wow.
it seems like a great way to solve that. But that's a separate topic. But yeah, I think if they're going to get to 10 years with this product, they're going to do it by listening to their customers, and they've shown that they're doing it.
Yeah, and I'm rooting for them. Still one of my favorite games, and still a game I plan to come back to periodically for the next 10 years, even if they don't add anything else to it.
For sure. All right. Well, hey, as always, if you've liked what you've heard, hit your like and subscribe button down below. Helps us out a lot. And we'll see you next week.
Later.